Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing Starbound, the 2D open-world survival crafting game where your goal is to set out into the galaxy to find resources, weapons, and complete quests.
The first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Starbound is currently in full release and available on most consoles as well as PC for $15.
So what exactly is the game? Well, Starbound is a game that on its surface may seem very similar to something like Terraria, but actually has many underlying differences. These include things like its combat, weaponry, planet system, and even its story.
Now the first thing we should cover is probably going to be the story. Don't worry, no major spoilers here. The Starbound story basically boils down to you needing to gather a series of keys. To get one of these keys, you will have to repeat the same style of quest just on different planets. To give you an example, you will usually need to go scan objects from a certain species of aliens and then go do a relatively short dungeon afterwards. At the end of it, you will fight one of the game's bosses, which can be very challenging if you're undergeared. There are also some side quests with interesting storylines, as well as ones where you unlock new upgrades.
While the main story is relatively simplistic in the sense that you repeat the exact same missions just on different planets, it works out great because in order to complete them, you'll need some sort of what I would call a progression item. These are things like a backpack that lets you breathe underwater for the water planets, or a radiation-resistant backpack for the planets filled with radiation. Bosses will also be challenging, and so the game tries to steer you in the direction of getting more gear before attempting them right away. You certainly could completely ignore the story if you wanted to, and just explore the world for what it is, but it's nice that you pretty much experience all of that through simply playing through the story anyways.
The boss battles and combat in the game are definitely one of its better elements. As far as combat goes, you have ranged and melee weapons, each having several different weapon types and element types within them. For an example, there's a poison staff that can draw a line that will damage anything that comes in contact with it, as well as it being able to be used as a melee weapon on top of that. There are also ranged weapons, such as a group of gnomes that you can throw at enemies to damage them. There are also more traditional weapons that you'll find, such as daggers, hammers, bows, machine guns, grenade launchers, and much more, with each one having their own unique effects.
Each boss you come across in Starbound has a unique pattern. Sometimes they even feel like bosses akin to something like Hollow Knight or Metroid in the sense that you must learn their moveset and how to dodge them. With teammates, the bosses are much easier, as if he kills one of you, the other still has time to run back. When you do them solo, however, they present a much larger challenge. If you start to struggle with one, the good news is that you can always go back and farm up some more gear so that they are a little bit easier to handle.
Lastly, let's talk about the main gameplay loop aside from doing the quest lines. The main gameplay loop is actually rather similar to something like Terraria, just with you jumping around from planet to planet to find different resources. However, to survive on those planets, you will need a specific item which you need to get from a lower tier planet before it. It seems like it's a very go wherever you want kind of a game, but in all actuality, you have to get certain pieces of gear in order to get to certain planets, and you will then need the resources and items from the previous planets in order to get that piece of gear so that you can go to the planets. This makes the game much more linear than it tries to seem at first. The good news though is that there are so many different planets and a lot of different biomes which all have unique and interesting things to deal with. All I can say is please don't ever make me go back to the eyeball biome again, because that was horrific.
So now let's move into the pros and cons section for the video. First up for the pros is that the mods in Starbound can dramatically increase the quality of the game as well as its replayability value. Some of these mods add ridiculous amounts of new content and can completely overhaul your game, so much so that it might not even feel like Starbound anymore. After that is that the boss encounters in Starbound were by far some of the best I've played in quite a while. Each boss feels unique and interesting to fight, and all have their own mechanics that you will have to learn in order to beat them. If it helps, you can think of bosses in Metroid, Hollow Knight, and Cuphead as far as combat style goes. Another pro is that Starbound has lots of unique weapons, which helps it to stand out among other similar games. It's not just your typical magic staffs, swords, and bows, but it actually uses its space fantasy setting to implement things like grenade launchers, laser rifles, and even your own personal mech. And lastly for the pros is that there are a large variety of planet types, and each one feels unique and interesting. Even though you may visit 2 water worlds, they each are procedurally generated, so each one will be somewhat of a new experience.
Now for the cons. First up for the cons is the lackluster variety in quests when we're talking about the main story. The main story quest line is relatively interesting in its plot if you read all the text, but the problem with it is actually the quests themselves. You end up doing the same objective but with slightly different variations when you go to different planets. For an example, you're always going to go ahead and scan something and then do a dungeon and fight a boss, then rinse and repeat until you have all the keys, and then you get to do the end of the storyline. Personally, this was not fun for me, and I really wish they would have done something different here, but it is what it is. Now, the second con we have for Starbound is that losing gear on death can be very punishing. Now, fair disclosure here, there is different ways you can make your character so that you don't lose gear on death. However, it doesn't really feel like that's the intended way to play. So for the purposes of the con, we're assuming you're playing on the default character type, that being the one where you actually drop your loot whenever you die. Now, this isn't the end of the world, but if you do die and you have your absolute best set of gear and you're in a very difficult place to get back to, it can be extremely hard to ever get back there without going and grinding a ton of gear all over again just to get that same loot you already grinded.
So now it's time for the rating for the game, and when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, in Starbound, we would want to get roughly 15 hours of enjoyment out of the $15 that we spent. And after putting over 24 played hours into this game, we give it 8 out of 10 potatoes.
Starbound was easily one of the most relaxing and enjoyable games that we have played in quite a while. It takes the tried and true formula of games like Terraria and attempts to put a space sci-fi twist on it. Its boss battles were definitely nothing to scoff at either, which was nice to see. Each one felt like a unique and challenging experience. Unfortunately, while the story itself may not be bad at all, the quest objectives for the main storyline felt very repetitive and tedious. We didn't sign up to be an intergalactic archaeologist here, and while some people may enjoy that aspect, we personally did not. However, with mods, this game can easily be one of the best games we have ever experienced. With all that being said though, we feel it's safe to say that Starbound is definitely worth the cost.
Before you guys go, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe, as we put out multiple new videos every single week, and your support is what makes this all possible. If you would like to support us even further and get some cool benefits, check out our membership program, which can be found in the join button below. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.